Emily Carter never believed a single afternoon could quietly change the direction of her life. But the truth is, it only takes one moment of silence. One look held a second too long for everything to shift. It started on a rainy Sunday in Seattle, the kind of day where the sky stays gray and time feels slower than usual. Emily almost didn't go. She had work emails piling up, laundry waiting, and a strange feeling in her chest she couldn't explain. But Rachel was her best friend, and Rachel had insisted. "Just come over. We'll relax," she had said, laughing. Emily trusted that laugh. She always had. Rachel and Emily had been friends for nearly 10 years. They met during freshman orientation at a university in Oregon, bonded over late-night coffee, and shared dreams of big lives. Over time, friendship turned into something deeper, the kind where you don't need to speak every day to know you matter. When Rachel met Mark, Emily welcomed him without hesitation. He was kind, grounded, dependable. The type of man you'd want your friend to build a future with. Mark never tried too hard. He listened. He remembered details. He treated Emily like a friend, not a threat. That made him feel safe. It's too safe. That afternoon, the three of them sat in the living room, rain tapping against the windows. Rachel talked about work. Mark teased her gently. Emily smiled and listened, feeling like everything was exactly where it should be. For a while, nothing felt wrong. Then Rachel remembered she needed to pick up a prescription. "I'll be back in 20 minutes, she said, grabbing her keys. She smiled at Emily. "Don't steal him," she joked, laughing as she stepped out the door. The joke landed wrong. The door closed. The house grew quiet in a way Emily hadn't expected. She stayed seated, scrolling her phone, pretending nothing had changed. Mark stood near the window, watching the rain. "So," he said, breaking the silence, "how have you really been?" It was a simple question. Too simple. Emily shrugged. "Busy. You know how it is." Mark nodded but didn't look convinced. "You always say that." Emily glanced up, surprised. He was looking at her nod in a bold way. Not in a way that felt inappropriate at first, but with attention. Real attention. Like he was seeing something beneath her words. She laughed it off and stood, walking toward the kitchen. "Want coffee?" she asked. "Sure," he replied, following her. The kitchen was small. The sound of the coffee machine filled the air, giving them something to focus on. Emily busied herself with mugs, telling herself to relax. This was nothing. Just conversation. But then Mark spoke again. "Rachel worries about you," he said. "She thinks you carry too much alone." Emily froze for half a second. That wasn't his place to say. And yet it felt comforting. She turned, forcing a smile. "She worries about everyone. Not like this," he replied softly. Their eyes met. Emily felt something unexpected and ache. A warmth, a feeling she hadn't prepared for. It wasn't desire in a physical sense. It was recognition, like being understood without explaining yourself. That scared her more than anything. She looked away quickly, grabbing the mugs. "Coffee's ready," she said, her voice lighter than she felt. They returned to the living room, sitting farther apart than before. Emily crossed her legs, bouncing her foot, trying to ground herself. Her thoughts raced. Why did that feel different? Why did she care? Mark sipped his coffee, then set the mug down. "I didn't mean to make things weird," he said. "You didn't," Emily replied too quickly. But they both knew that wasn't true. The rain grew heavier outside, thunder rumbling in the distance. Emily checked her phone, counting the minutes until Rachel returned. She hated herself for wanting the door to open and, at the same time, feeling curious about what would happen if it didn't. Mark leaned back, rubbing his hands together. "You ever feel like you're living the life you planned, but still missing something?" he asked. Emily swallowed. "All the time." She hadn't meant to answer honestly. Mark smiled sadly. "Yeah, me too." The words hung between them. Emily felt her chest tighten. This was dangerous territory. Emotional honesty had a way of opening doors that should stay closed. She stood up again. "I should probably get going soon," she said. Mark looked surprised. "Rachel will be back any minute." "I know," Emily replied. She stopped. There was no good way to finish that sentence. Mark stood too. The space between them felt smaller than it should have been. Emily could smell his cologne, clean and familiar. She felt aware of herself in a way she hadn't in years. Neither of them moved. "I don't want to mess anything up," Mark said quietly. Emily nodded, relief and fear mixing together. "Me neither." For a moment it felt like time paused. No touching, no crossing lines. Just two people standing too close to a truth they didn't want to face. Then headlights swept across the window. Rachel's car. Emily exhaled sharply, stepping back as if waking from a dream. She grabbed her bag, her heart pounding. "That's her," she said. Mark nodded, his face carefully neutral. "Yeah." Rachel walked in moments later, cheerful and unaware. She talked about traffic, about a long line at the pharmacy, about dinner plans. Emily laughed when expected, nodded at the right moments, but her body felt distant, like she was watching herself from somewhere else. When it was time to leave, Rachel hugged her tightly. "Love you," she said. "Love you too," Emily replied, guilt pressing heavy on her chest. Mark gave a polite smile. "Drive safe." Emily nodded and left, the rain soaking her jacket as she hurried to her car. Once inside, she sat there for a long moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, breathing hard. Nothing had happened, and yet everything had. That night, Emily lay awake in her apartment, staring at the ceiling as the rain continued outside. She replayed the afternoon over and over, analyzing every word, every look. She told herself she was overreacting, that feelings didn't matter unless acted upon. But deep down, she knew the truth. Something had shifted. A line had blurred. And no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't pretend it hadn't. Emily never imagined a simple dinner invitation could feel like walking into a storm. She had been avoiding Rachel and Mark for weeks, carefully keeping distance. But when Rachel called with her usual cheerful voice, Emily hesitated and then said yes. Something about Rachel's warmth made it impossible to say no. Even though her chest tightened at the thought of being alone with Mark again, the night air was crisp as Emily drove across town. The streets were wet from a light drizzle, reflecting neon signs and taillights like a river of color. Every block felt heavy with anticipation. She kept telling herself it would be fine. She'd managed before. She could manage tonight. But the truth was, she didn't know if she could. When she arrived at Rachel's apartment, Mark was already there, setting the table. The sight of him made her stomach twist in ways she couldn't name. He looked calm, collected, polite, like always. But Emily could feel an invisible thread between them, taut and charged. It wasn't physical, but it was there. Something unspoken, something forbidden, something neither of them could undo. Rachel greeted her with a hug and a laugh, the kind that made Emily's heart ache with guilt. She stayed close to her friend, masking the tension that hummed beneath the surface. Dinner began, casual as salad, chicken, small talk, but Emily noticed how Mark's eyes kept flicking to her. He didn't stare, not in a way anyone else would notice, but she felt it in the subtle glance that lingered too long. Every look made her pulse quicken, made the guilt inside her grow heavier. As Rachel stepped out to take a phone call, Emily felt at the moment she had been avoiding for weeks. Mark finally spoke, his voice low, careful. "Emily," he began, "I've been trying to ignore it, trying to act like nothing changed." Emily's throat tightened. She sat still, gripping her napkin. "Mark, it shouldn't have happened," she whispered, the words barely audible. "I know," he replied. "I keep telling myself that. But the truth is, it did happen. In our minds, even if nothing physical did. And pretending otherwise feels impossible." The confession hung in the air like smoke. Emily wanted to look away, to leave, to erase the conversation entirely, but her body refused. The emotional gravity between them was overwhelming. She understood him more than she wanted to admit. She had felt it too. The pull, the warmth, the dangerous curiosity that neither of them could control. "I can't. We can't," Emily said, her voice trembling slightly. "Rachel is... She's your life, Mark. She's my best friend. I don't want to ruin that for either of us." "I know," he said, his tone heavy. And that's why this is so hard. Because the feeling is real, even if it can't be acted on. And I can't pretend it's not there anymore. They sat in silence for a few moments, listening to the rain against the window, feeling the weight of their unspoken connection. It wasn't dramatic. There was no grabbing, no desperate confession, no physical crossing of lines. But it was electric, emotional, dangerous in its subtlety. Emily's chest ached with guilt and longing at the same time. She had never wanted to hurt Rachel, never wanted to betray the trust she had built over 10 years of friendship. But now she understood how easily feelings could betray logic, how one glance, one shared laugh, one quiet confession could alter everything. The sound of Rachel's laughter outside the room jolted Emily from her thoughts. Her friend was returning, unaware of the tension that had just passed. Emily's hand shook slightly as she stood, smoothing her skirt and trying to regain composure. Mark gave a polite smile, nodding toward the door as if nothing had occurred. Emily forced herself to smile back, but inside, her heart was racing. When Rachel came in, chatting about her phone call, Emily felt a pang of both relief and sorrow. Relief because the moment was over, because she didn't have to face the reality of what she felt out loud. Sorrow because the emotional truth between her and Mark had not disappeared. It was still there, lingering under polite conversation and casual smiles. Dinner continued with forced normalcy. Emily laughed at Rachel's jokes, answered questions about her work and her life. But every word felt weighted, every gesture measured. She couldn't stop thinking about the conversation she and Mark had just shared, about how close they had come to crossing invisible lines, about how her feelings and his collided in a dangerous, silent acknowledgement of what might have been. After dinner, Emily made her excuses to leave. She couldn't stay, not like this. She felt as if every second spent in the same room with Mark was a threat to her friendship with Rachel, a threat to her own peace of mind. As she hugged Rachel goodbye, she whispered a soft "love you," the guilt heavy in her voice. Rachel smiled warmly, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. Emily walked to her car through the drizzle, her jacket damp and clinging to her skin. Her hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel. The streetlights blurred through the rain, mirroring the blur of emotions in her mind. She told herself she had made the right choice: distance, silence, emotional boundaries, but the ache inside her told a different story. Some feelings once awakened do not simply go back to sleep. The drive home was quiet, her thoughts racing faster than the windshield wipers. She replayed every glance, every word, every subtle inflection. She wondered if Mark had felt the same torment she did, this heavy mix of longing, guilt, and impossibility. She hated herself for thinking about him, yet she couldn't stop. It wasn't physical, but it was just as consuming. That night, back in her apartment, Emily lay on her bed staring at the ceiling. The rain had stopped, but the storm inside her hadn't. She thought about Rachel's trust, Mark's integrity, and the invisible bond that had formed between her and him in those brief, stolen moments of honesty. She realized some mistakes don't need action to leave a mark. The emotion itself is enough to change things forever. Days turned into weeks, and Emily maintained her distance. She skipped dinners, avoided long conversations, and quietly retreated from the intimacy she had once shared with Rachel and Mark. The friendship endured. But it was different now. There was an invisible line drawn that could never fully be erased, a memory that lingered silently in every shared smile, every message, every casual interaction. She never told Rachel. She never confessed to Mark. They both pretended carefully, politely, like the previous weeks had never happened. But the emotional truth remained a subtle, haunting presence that neither could ignore. Emily realized that life doesn't always allow for clean endings. Some moments linger, haunting your heart with the weight of what could have been, reminding you that feelings don't always respect the boundaries you set. Years later, Emily would think back to that night, to the quiet tension at Rachel's dinner table and the soft, impossible pull between her and Mark. She would remember the ache, the guilt, the longing, and she would smile and wince at the same time. Some lines once blurred in thought can never fully be redrawn. And some connections, no matter how carefully avoided, stay with you forever. She had survived it, yes. She had kept her friendship intact and honored the trust of the people she loved. But she also knew that the memory of that emotional closeness of what almost happened would never truly leave her. It had changed her in subtle ways, in the way she guarded her heart, in the way she understood desire and temptation, in the way she recognized the fragility of relationships. And in that quiet understanding, Emily realized the hardest truth of all. Some mistakes are measured not in actions, but in feelings. And those feelings once felt echo through a lifetime.